My name's Tony Busby, E-4, United States Army, and this is my story. I'm not your typical case for the military, I believe. Growing up, I grew up in a very poor family in western Massachusetts. My parents were both addicts, which my younger brother followed into their footsteps, and I remember waking up at the end of 2001, beginning of 2002, looking into a mirror, living on my own, saying, I need to make a change in my life because I don't want to be like them. And I went down, sat down with the recruiter's office with the Marine Corps first, but at the time I was only 16, so they would not take me, but the Army would on a split option program. So I remember the Marine recruiter saying, hey, listen, if you really want to make a change in your life, let me introduce you to Staff Sergeant Josephitas with the United States Army, because they can take you in what's called the split option program, where I finish out my junior year, go to basic training, drill with a reserve unit throughout the winter and school year, then go to my AIT training, and then onto my duty station. So I had moved out of my parents' house very young, and worked it out with the recruiter, was going to school full-time, working full-time, went to Boston MEPS, and I remember coming back, I left for basic training, lost my little one-bedroom studio apartment that I had, and when I came back, I moved back to Massachusetts from Rhode Island. And when I did that, there were some circumstances with the curriculum requirements between Rhode Island and Massachusetts to where I didn't have the credits I was going to need to graduate. So they made me repeat the 11th grade. When I repeated the 11th grade, we had to talk to command. I ended up getting permanently placed with the reserve unit, the 304th Transportation Company, because they had to alter my contract in order for me to stay in, because with me having to repeat the 11th grade due to circumstances outside of my control, the Army said, hey, we're going to give you an extension to get your diploma. So after repeating the 11th grade, I then went to AIT in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. What a lovely place to go. So I then returned back from basic training and AIT, and I end up going back to school to finish out my senior year. Just so happened the dean of students was actually a reserve colonel who worked in the Pentagon in the summertime. So he also helped me out quite a bit because the Iraqi war had already kicked off. And because I had completed my training, but had not completed high school yet, they tried to mobilize me 3 times my senior year. So I had to duty to report, so I went and reported to the duty station. I then had to explain my situation to command, that I was actually still in high school and non-deployable. They then had to call the colonel, who was the dean of students, verify all of that information, get records, and then they sent me back to school. So I graduate high school. I'm trying to switch my contract to go active duty. They put stop loss on us because our unit was on alert to go to combat. And they turn around and they go, well, you're getting transferred to the 482nd Transportation Company out of Cherokee, Iowa, and you are going to be going to combat with them. So 2004, I get out there, we mobilize out of Fort Sill, and then we end up in country. And I tell everybody that being in country was the best time of my life, and it was also the worst time of my life, because I have some memories of some very incredible people that I had the pleasure of serving with and working with, and there's also the memories of the bad stuff that happened. I was there for the Siege of Fallujah, survived over a dozen roadside bombs, multiple firefights, and ended up getting wounded when a Chinese rocket came in and hit our fuel pod at Al Asad Air Base, and also hit over where we were loading some Humvees and equipment onto the back of some flatbed tractor trailers. And I used the wheel well and wheel of the Humvee I was loading to stop me from getting shrapnel, because I heard the exhaust come in, and then I remember hearing a bang, and then I woke up on my back about 10, 12 feet away from where I originally was. Ended up going to the med station, and they didn't have x-ray equipment, so they said, here's some Motrin. You know, we don't think you broke anything because you are walking. Even though you're in a lot of pains, we think you sprained something, so here's Motrin, go back to work. I found out about 15, 16 months later that I had actually fractured my spine in 2 places. And that if it wasn't for wearing my body armor every day and being outside the wire, running convoys and doing convoy security, that I could be in a lot worse shape than I am now. After coming home, I wanted to move, but I couldn't pass a PT test. So one of the staff NCOs for the 304th, and I'm not going to name his name, but I did the PT test. I did the best I could, but it wasn't enough to pass, and he fudged a number to make my run pass. I passed the sit-ups and I passed the push-ups. I just could not pass the run because of my spinal injury. So he did that so I could move to Florida, and I joined a reserve unit down here. And that reserve unit, I was having problems getting back and forth because I really didn't have a reliable vehicle at the time, but there was a military police company literally right next door to where I was living. So I went in and talked to them. They were Florida National Guard. I talked to the recruiter, had my contract amended again, and joined the Florida National Guard as a military police officer. Went and did my training for that at Fort McClellan. And then still all this time didn't have to repeat a PT test, thank goodness. And then I went and fought forest fires in 2008 up in the Jacksonville area with the National Guard right before I was medically released. Because at that point, they did try to have us take PT tests, and I could do everything but the run. So we tried to get me a waiver to allow me to do it as a speed walk. And they came back and said, no, your medical records say this, you're done. 48 hours later, the unit got its orders for Afghanistan, and I was absolutely heartbroken because the majority of that unit had not seen any form of combat. There was only maybe 20 of us in that unit who had seen combat, and I didn't want people who hadn't had the experience to go over there with any kind of guidance. And I voiced my opinion about it and tried to do what I could to stay in, but they said, sorry, you can't run, you're done. And that was pretty much the end of that. Then I got into transportation as a civilian. Did that for 10 years, and then then got into insurance with my wife, which I now have 2 insurance companies here locally in Central Florida, Great Florida of Hunters Creek and Great Florida of Lake Nona. And I met Trish Murphy, who is the current state chair for FAVOB, the Florida Association of Veteran-Owned Businesses, through BNI. And after talking with her and meeting a couple other veterans in the FAVOB group, I decided to join FAVOB, and am now the sitting vice chair for the Orlando chapter out of the 5 chapters we have statewide. Our mission there is to help veterans with legislative affairs, to try to make veteran-friendly legislation, work with our legislatures to make it easier for veteran-owned businesses and disabled veteran-owned businesses to get state contracts, get their preferences easier than the lengthy processes that you have to go through, like going through SBA and SAM.gov and then the VA and then this and that. So we try to help get those organizations to streamline the process. I also am here today thanks to the Camaraderie Foundation, and worked with them last year as one of the mentors to mentor a fellow veteran who was suffering from some massive PTSD issues, and tried to help him walk down the right path and get him the right help through the VA network. And, Camaraderie was also helping that family with counseling and everything else. And so even though I can no longer serve in the military and haven't since 2008, I still want to serve my community and my fellow veterans in any capacity possible.